Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Welcome to the 8th in a series of Redux reviews, where I revisit my earlier videos that were recorded a few years ago on substandard equipment and with less in the way of production values. The aim of these reviews is to enable me to tighten and expand the writing, fleshing it out with further insights where appropriate, and to produce something of superior video and audio quality to the original. Today's review is 1990's Vecna Lives for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition by TSR. Ok, first a bit of history. Vecna Lives is a 96-page adventure for 6 to 8 characters levels 12 to 15 and is part of the WGA series of adventures for the World of Greyhawk setting. To the cover. Here we have an excellent atmospheric cover by industry legend Jeff Easley depicting the famous hand and eye of Vecna as well as the standing stones of Tovag Baragu in the background. There'll be spoilers from this point on, so stop watching now if you intend to play this. Ok, to the inside. The first thing we're greeted with is an introduction that gives an overview of how the DM should run the adventure. It advises that they should also have the World of Greyhawk campaign set, the City of Greyhawk box set and the Greyhawk Monstrous Compendium, as well as potentially the Manual of the Planes. It also says that the DM should familiarise themselves with the WGA 1-3 series of adventures, the Falcon's Revenge, Falcon Master and Flames of the Falcon, as they provide additional background information. The game is intended for a balanced mixture of races and classes. We are told that in short this campaign is designed to kill characters, and if your playstyle is to give your characters a break, then you need to adopt a more steely resolve, and that you should carefully consider whether you want to allow your players to use their favourite characters in this scenario. We're given instructions on how Vecna Lives is reminiscent of a horror movie, and that surprise and suspense are paramount in attaining the right atmosphere. We have discussion on mood and foreshadowing and making your players sweat. This is followed by the story of Vecna. Vecna is a figure shrouded in the mists of history, from a time before the war between the Sul and Baclunish empires. More a figure of legend than fact. In this era, Vecna was considered to be the mightiest of all wizards, completely unsurpassed by his peers, and who ruled over a long-forgotten nation. At least, that is one theory. Another theory holds that his tower rose from the depths of the Near-Death, and yet another that his power stretched across the plains themselves. In life, Vecna was known for his cruel nature. He's said to have bred entire villages simply to supply his laboratories and to have annihilated entire cities under tidal waves of rock. Some also suggest that Vecna was responsible for the Bright Desert. He was even said to be half-elven. As he grew old and neared death, he became determined to live on in one way or another, and what happened next is not known for sure. Some say he amassed enough power to cheat death, others say that the gods cursed him to forever dwell on the border of life and death. Beyond death, Vecna became the greatest of all lichers. His name was Whispered, Lord Vecna, the Whispered One, the Master of the Spider Throne, the Undying King, the Lord of the Rotted Tower. During this time, one of his lieutenants, the vampire known as Kaz the Bloody-Handed, rose to power. As Vecna's body weakened, Kaz increasingly became his instrument of rule. As time passed, Vecna took less interest in the daily running of his kingdom. As a sign of Vecna's authority, he forged a mighty weapon like none had seen before, the Sword of Kaz. Such was the power of the weapon that nobody could stand against Kaz when he wielded it. As it was forged by Vecna's hand, the weapon was evil, and it whispered corrupting thoughts to Kaz, feeding his pride and vanity. Over time, Kaz became corrupted, and finally one day struck out at Vecna. Though nobody ever saw the battle that ensued, all that was said to remain in the destroyed ruin of Vecna's tower was his lifeless hand and eye. Kaz and the rest of Vecna's remains were nowhere to be found. In the time since, the 3 artefacts have resurfaced and vanished on various occasions, each time bringing great power and woe to all that wield them. Unfortunately, the hand and eye is not all that remains of Vecna. His will was too powerful to be destroyed, even though his body perished. His essence wandered on earth, drawn to those that revered and worshipped him. Over time, a cult has grown around Vecna, and at last he was accepted as a demigod amongst the legions of evil. Vecna, despite being guaranteed immortality, was perhaps unsurprisingly not satisfied. He has devised a plan to ascend to the status of greater god by creating a mystical web all over Earth that cuts off all other gods from their followers. After this, he intends to open the gates of time and bring forth his faithful legions from the past to allow him to ascend. The only problem facing him is the fact that he requires his eye and his hand to finally empower the mystical web and put his plan into action. Vecna has no idea where they are, as the gods hid them from his sight when they were sundered from his body during the titanic struggle with Kaz. Vecna is blind to their location and can only determine where they are by the effect on others, much like finding a boat by the wake it makes. This time, Vecna is determined to succeed. Next up is the prologue. The scenario takes the unusual decision of giving the players the famous Circle of 8 to run. Yes, the legendary wizards from Greyhawk. Otto, Tenser, Ottoluki, Rari, Bigby, Nistel, Dramige, and the less well-known Jalazi Salvarian. They've been sent by Mordenkainen to investigate a burial mound in the Cron Hills, west of the city of Greyhawk. The mound is heavily shielded against magical perception and covered in wards. Upon the Circle investigating the mound, they are promptly ambushed by the occupant, a warrior called Halmadar, who has attached a hand and eye to his body and thinks he is Vecna himself. As the Circle are inside the mound, they cannot teleport out or otherwise escape due to these wards in place, and Halmadar quickly uses the hand's time stop ability to jump about the combat and kill the Circle of 8 using the hand's full touch power. Death, no save. This is intended to leave the players in a state of shock that such powerful characters could be laid waste to so quickly. We are given a few options for the DM with how to treat this in the short and long term. No doubt most of the wizards had contingency spells in place to activate clones, wish them back to life, etc., but this is left for the DM to decide. It then jumps to Chapter 1, where we have NPCs or even the player's own characters being associated with the Circle of 8 in some way, being afflicted with terrible visions of their demise, with the message "Warn Mordenkainen" ringing in their ears. The players have a number of viable options for contacting Mordenkainen, the most obvious being via the College of Wizardry in the city of Greyhawk, but also the High Priest of Bokob is a good option. If they go via the College of Wizardry or Church of Bokob, they arrange a meeting with Kieran Jalusian or Ravel de Cinder, respectively. Kieran tells the players of current events leading up to the Circle being sent to the burial mound. Each of these people arrange to meet the players in an inn called the Rock and Oliphant at a later date. Chapter 2 takes the players to the Rock and Oliphant, where they meet with either Kieran or Ravel. Whoever they meet pulls out a ring and the image of Mordenkainen appears. Mordenkainen is every bit the powerful mage he is portrayed as and listens to the player's story. If the players are respectful towards him, he shares that he suspects that the hand and eye of Vecna are behind this. He also informs the players that there is a divination blackout that is spreading far and wide and suggests that various powers could be at work. It is at this point that the cult of Vecna attacks the party, led by two horrific creatures, the Hand of Vecna, a massive hulking creature with a hand instead of a head, and the Eye of Vecna, a huge creature with a giant eye instead of a head. Chapter 3 is based around the research that the players must do. It gives multiple places to study as well as a list of books that can be found and what they contain. It also details how the various temples of the area can assist and gives details on tracking down the cultists that attacked them in the inn, which leads them to the River Quarter, a place where the Reni, a river-dwelling tribe of gypsies, live. The players can gain various bits of information from the Reni, but also the cult becomes aware of their investigations. It also details other factions that can provide information, like the Thieves Guild and the Beggars Guild. All paths appear to lead to Verbobanc and a gnomish settlement called Osnabrult. Chapter 4 details travelling to Verbobanc and gives us information on the factions and the people in charge there. Chapter 5 covers the journey to Verbobanc. The party are offered passage there by an old peg-legged Reni sailor called Turin Voronstak, who, unknown to the party, is actually an avatar of Vecna who intends on using the players to lead him to his hand and eye. In Verbobanc there is a strict pecking order which the players will need to understand, and they can get information in Gnomeberg on the location of Osnabrult. Verbobanc itself is a difficult place for evil cults to infiltrate due to the heavy presence of the cult of St. Cuthbert and the Knights of Verbobanc. The cult attempts to infiltrate the group at this point and lures them to an old quarry where they're ambushed. It's at this stage that the players find out information that the cult has a shrine under the Scythe Sheaf Tavern in Verbobanc. As the players ambush the cult, they're faced with cult members and Halmadar himself. As the battle ensues, Turim unveils himself, takes the hand and eye, and advises the players to meet him at Tovag Baragu to claim their reward for aiding him. Chapter 6 gives detail on Tovag Baragu, a stone circle of immense power that lies in the bright desert west of the Crystal Mist Mountains. The players have various methods of travelling there, and it is at this point that they start having heaven-sent visions directing them to the gnomish community of Osnabrult. Chapter 7 details the players' journey and arrival in Osnabrult. When they arrive here, it is clear that the community are recovering from a recent attack. Roofs are blown off houses and windows are shattered. The players are treated with caution by the gnomes. However, if they ingratiate themselves to them, they are told the legend of a strange man arriving here and plunging a sword into the ground. The players' earlier research should lead them to the conclusion that this is possibly the Sword of Kaz. Should the players be accepted amongst the gnomes, they must undergo a series of grueling tests to prove their worth before being led to the chamber where the sword is hidden, buried deep in the earth. As the players are discussing what to do, they hear a rumbling and the sword bursts forth from the ground. The gnomes, overjoyed that the sword will finally be gone from their possession, hold a feast in the players' honour, which they insist they attend. It is during the feast that the community is attacked by a priest of Ios and his Orog servants. Should the players spare the life of the priest, he offers an alliance in exchange for his freedom. The next stop for the players, armed with the sword of Kaz, is Tovag Baragu. Chapter 8 details the players' journey to Tovag Baragu, and this continues into Chapter 9, which details their arrival. Tovag Baragu is surrounded by local tribesmen for about 3 miles out from the circle, who are all sitting silently waiting for something to happen. The players can make their way to the circle without hindrance, and when they arrive, they see a lone figure in the centre, the avatar of Vecna, Turum Vrostak. Turum seems to be engrossed in a complex magical ritual. As the characters approach, they realise that the stone lintels of Tovag Baragu show different places and times. As the players get closer, Turum makes an offer to each character: destroy your friends and I will make you a god. In the hopefully unlikely event that one of the players decides to do this, Vecna is good to his word and makes one of the players a minor demigod under the control of the DM, and the game ends here. Should one of the players decide at this point to attack Vecna, then for a surprise. The sword of Kaz is useless against him. Vecna utterly destroys the first character to attack him with the wave of a hand. If they flat out refuse but don't attack him, a wise move, he magically casts them into one of the gateways with the words, "Since you refused me, you can join Kaz in eternal hell," and the players are flung into Vecna's prison, Citadel Cavitius. Chapter 10 details the players' arrival at Citadel Cavitius. It exists on a demiplane which borders the negative quasi-plane of Ash and appears as a colossal skull with the top sheared off. It is Vecna's own private fortress and prison. The Citadel is contained within a force field that protects the occupants from the effects of the plane. The players are greeted by the doorkeeper, an old man dressed in monk's robes who requests the players' names as they enter. If they're smart, they can ask the doorkeeper if Kaz is here, which the doorkeeper can help with. The Citadel is a hellish place. Enemies of Vecna call this place home, and most who die here continue to exist as undead in eternal torment. The players can meet various people driven mad by their imprisonment here, but with a degree of investigation can track down Kaz himself. Kaz is surrounded by a group of undead and sycophants who he holds court over, with Kaz now being a powerful vampire. The characters can try to convince Kaz to help them, and he only shows interest when Vecna is mentioned. Kaz's price is steep. He wants the sword of Kaz back. If the players hand it over to him, he uses the sword's plane shift power to leave the players stranded. His only concern is escaping the Citadel. The players will need to take precautions to prevent Kaz from abandoning them. Once a deal is struck, Kaz takes them back to Tovag Baragu and tells the players that it is this simple. They can't defeat Vecna. The sword is useless against him, and that only one of equal power would stand a chance, and even then they would not be completely destroyed, just cast into the outer planes. Chapter 11 details the return to Tovag Baragu, where Vecna's ritual is nearing completion. At this point they realise that Kaz and the sword are useless against Vecna, and that they only have one place to turn for help: the gods themselves. If the priest of Ios is still with them, he urges them to pray to Ios for help. Should the players do this, or even just pray to the gods for help, paladins are instantly stripped of their powers, but Ios the Old answers. Ios appears and confronts Vecna, and a titanic magical battle ensues between the demigods. As they fight, the bridge of time is opened, and Vecna's followers from the past start pouring through, which the players need to take care of. Should they do this, they are left with a huge problem: 2 evil demigods fighting. The best option here is that they somehow manage to get them through one of the time portals, which is no easy task, but which banishes Vecna and Ios away from Earth, for a time at least. Chapter 12 details what happens if the players win, as opposed to if Vecna lives. The players are rewarded in subtle ways by the powers of Greyhawk for their immense task. If Vecna wins, Earth becomes a darker, grimmer place in need of adventurers. Appendix 1 details the main artefacts of the game: the Eye of Vecna, the Hand of Vecna, and the Sword of Kaz, as well as suggestions on how they can be destroyed permanently. Appendix 2 gives information on Vecna as a demigod, and also the statistics for his manifestation, as well as detailing the structure and duties of his priesthood. Following this, we have the game stats for the Eye and the Hand. Appendix 4 gives stats for the various NPCs that the players can meet through the adventure, including Kaz the Terrible. Appendix 5 gives stats for all of the members of the Circle of 8 and their henchmen that the players can play in lieu of their own characters. Vecna Lives is a mixed bag of good ideas and bad execution. The adventure is extremely linear in format, and the idea that one of the characters could potentially be killed off by Vecna was something I was kind of troubled with, though in retrospect, it is Vecna we're talking about here, and players should realistically have that expectation at the levels the scenario is aimed at. The scenario describes itself as almost horror-like, but then does pretty much nothing to back this up. I admit that the Circle of 8 being killed off in seconds was one I enjoyed in theory, but in execution it seemed unrealistic given their power level, but again, it is the eye in the hand of Vecna in play here. I felt like a lot of details were left out for unknown reasons. For example, we're told that 7 magical items have been used to create a mystical web of energy that cuts off other gods from their followers, but that was all we ever heard about this. It made me wonder why the players wouldn't be trying to investigate this instead. Also, there is a huge flaw in the idea that divinations don't work. The Paladin Detect Evil ability does still work perfectly well, which when I ran it made every attempt to infiltrate the party fail as the Paladin just picked them out instantly. The only exception to this was Vecna's avatar, Turin Varostak, who has a non-detection effect at all times. For me, the problem was that AD&D at this stage was crying out for an adventure on an epic scale, something that had not been done since the days of Gary Gygax's GDQ 1-7. Greyhawk, for everything wonderful about it, had always seemed the most reserved of Dungeons & Dragons settings, and Vecna Lives was an attempt to break this stalemate, and ultimately was a good idea that was poorly realised on paper. I imagine if you had a party that followed the linear path of the adventure without asking too many questions, they would love it. But how many groups do that in practice? I ran this adventure back in the day, and my players enjoyed it, but I think that was more down to the work I put into making it work than what is presented here. It gladdens me that Vecna is finally entrenched in the D&D multiverse as a god from 3rd edition onwards, and even become a bit of a household name due to the Stranger Things TV series. But it's these things that do more to entrench his legacy than this adventure ever did, although I do admit that Vecna Lives probably planted the seed. Trying to pick up an original copy of this adventure will cost you a fair bit, and to be honest, it's really not worth it. If you really want it, you can grab a copy on PDF from DriveThruRPG for around $10. It's far more style over substance, and it's for completists only. I give it a 5 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. Also, if you're interested in buying this product, I'll put some links below. Lastly, if you like what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon or even becoming a member of my YouTube channel. Bud out.